Welcome back to the Deliberate Exchange. Today is very exciting because I am interviewing my friend Kristina. She is the owner of my local studio called the Lotus Loft here in Port Perry. And we're going to have a fun conversation because we're not nervous. All about how our paths ended up intersecting and some of the amazing things that Kristina has taught me along the way. So, Kristina, please introduce yourself.
Oh, an intro. Okay. All right. So my name is Kristina, as Chelsea said, and I run a yoga studio here in Port Perry, which is how I met beautiful Chelsea. I teach yoga, run a studio, and have 2 little ones, and that's about it.
That's about it, she says. And yet, we're just scratching the surface. So we'll start with how and when we met. And it was in the time that nobody wants to talk about, which is the pandemic. And of course, I like to go full steam ahead and talk about the pandemic. Yeah. I had moved back to town and I signed up for a beginner's yoga class. I was on this new improvement journey, and I saw this 6-week thing advertised, and I had no idea. I knew about yoga, but I didn't know about yoga. And so I signed up for your class, and literally look what happened since. And I remember taking that class, and it was your mom.
Yeah.
And we had so many laughs.
Yes, we did.
And I feel like we all became really fast friends in that particular class.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was the gateway also. There was a gateway into moon circles and manifesting and surrendering and crystals and oils and everything. So before we continue on all those different tangents, I love for you to explain how you even got into starting the yoga studio.
Okay. So speaking of the pandemic, I was the one that decided to open a business during the pandemic, and not just a business, a brick and mortar business where people were shutting down and losing businesses. And I was like, I'm going to open a yoga studio.
That's why I love you.
And I just really strongly felt a need for this community to have that space because we didn't have that. And I was new to Port Perry as well. Had been here for about not quite a year. Was trying to find a new circle of friends, new circle of whatever it might be, and was really failing hard at that. Kept getting into these groups with 19-year-olds, and I was like, well, this is not what I had expected. And I was looking for somewhere to do yoga myself for my personal practice. I was looking for somewhere to teach yoga and could not find it without having to drive 30, 40 minutes outside of town. So I just, without going into too long of a story about how that came to be, it was definitely a vision through self-Reiki and my meditations that it kind of transpired. So I'll leave it at that.
Amazing. I love it. And it does take a certain intestinal fortitude, as they say, to open something like that, the brick and mortar, to your point, in the middle of a pandemic. But the healing capacity that a studio like yours offers is exactly what the world needed. So it's no surprise that you're 5 years?
3.5.
3.5?
Yeah.
Why it's so successful. And you've opened a new studio, a bigger studio, you're expanding and growing. And what you said about creating this space about to do yoga and to teach yoga, that was part and parcel why I had joined and took the beginner's class, because I was looking for a community as well. I had recently quit drinking. And it's funny because when people ask me well, where do I find my friends? Where do I find people that are on the same wavelength as me after they quit drinking in my sober communities? And the very first thing I tell them is to find a yoga studio. They will have weird moon circles and meditation circles, and just be open and go to those, because that has given me such a great foundation into all the different practices that I do now. So I'm so grateful that you decided to open that in the first place. And I love that it's become an entry point for other people. Not that I'm sure you didn't open it with the idea of this is for sober people, but
No. Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes part and parcel. I find people like on a wellness journey or on a spiritual journey tend to not have, I don't want to say always, but it tends to be a relationship that they've kind of already steered away from usually, or are trying to.
Yeah. Amazing. And before you went into like the yoga, the Reiki and all that kind of stuff, you were working in the corporate arena.
I was.
Corporate banking.
Yeah.
Bit of a contrast.
A wee bit. Yes.
And so what is like the biggest kind of shifts or differences that you find from like that corporate mindset to, of course, like you're still an entrepreneur, you're still a badass who runs a business, but like there's definitely some differences there. So I would love for you to explain that.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me was the flexibility. You know, not having to like be somewhere at a certain time based on somebody else's expectations, or, you know, stay later because of XYZ, whatever the case may be. So flexibility was like a huge thing for me, but shifting from like the corporate side to entrepreneur wellness area, just not having to deal with like a lot of the like corporate drama or corporate like BS, I guess you could call it, right? Of like dreading having to go to work. You know, before it was like, I have to, and now it's like, I get to, right? It's something that I enjoy, which I'm super grateful for, because not everyone has those opportunities always.
Of course. And I think that's like a really good point, because so many people probably listening are thinking like, I fucking hate having to go to my job, right? Like they haven't taken the plunge, they haven't found like, you know, another calling, or like maybe they do want to stay where they are. But what would be the advice that you could give to somebody who is maybe in that position where they're going to be working like their corporate 9 to 5, whatever that looks like? Right now they're kind of hating it. How can you, or what would you say to them to shift that mindset to the I get to in the same situation?
So I think like, you know, if they're going to the corporate world and that's kind of the arena that they're still playing in, right? I think the mindset is just something they have to work on every single day. Of just, you know, finding the little pieces of gratitude of getting to go to work, because there's a lot of people that don't even get to do that, right? Now, if they're obviously looking to do something like much bigger, like trying to leave something, obviously that advice piece there would be like a little bit different, because it's hard to just like leave something to start something completely brand new. And with my story, I'll elaborate, because I was kind of forced out of the corporate world. I had always kind of wanted to, and never felt like ready or felt secure enough to make that leap. But the pandemic kind of forced me out of that arena, because I was basically given the choice of, well, that's great that you have children and that you can't send them to daycare or school, but you still need to come to work.
Right.
Well, I don't know how, I don't know how to do that. And I kind of felt like out of all the hats as a mom and a wife or whatever we wear, it was, okay, I have like corporate Kristina. I have like my yogi wellness Kristina. I have mom Kristina. I was like, one of these has to give. And it's not going to be the mom Kristina that gives.
No, you can't just sell your kids.
Right?
Like you could, but like that's frowned upon.
A wee bit, right? Yeah.
Don't sell your kids.
And I couldn't give up the wellness side, right? And prior to having kids, like balancing the corporate and the wellness was very easy for me to do, right? Like I could go do my 9 to 5, had great relationships. I did enjoy a lot of pieces of it, right? And then on the weekends or the evenings, I could teach yoga part-time. I could do all these practices. It wasn't, I could find the time. And then add kids into the equation, you have a lot less of that time. And then you have a pandemic with schools closed and just drop your, so I felt a little bit forced out.
Sure.
So I took an unpaid leave of absence from the corporate gig, because I was like, I don't know what to do. Yeah. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to do.
Right.
So I was unpaid leave for a little bit of time. And then through that, I really kind of came back to strengthen my spiritual journey. And I know that we have a relationship with the word surrender.
Oh, yes.
That I shared, with you, but because I had to experience that of we can force and really try to force what the outcome is to be or what we want it to be. But sometimes we just need to just stop. Yeah. And, find those moments to just sit in silence and see what happens.
That's beautifully said. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, like surrender has been such a hot topic since we met. Like the surrender piece, like intertwines with you introducing me to Gabby Bernstein and like her world of manifestation and all that kind of stuff. And really, like, again, to your point, releasing the outcome, because it's especially for women, and like of course men too, but like I think women especially, like we want to control every little bit, and we want to make sure that we have something like, you know, a sure thing. And even what you were saying about you know, like the security of having like that job, and you know where you're going to get a paycheck, you know where that's coming from, but then like making the conscious choice to leave that away, to take that leave of absence, you're surrendering big time to all of like those big pieces that make us feel nice and good inside.
Yes.
The security piece and safety,
Yeah.
financially, otherwise. Not dissimilar to what I've done with my career and like leaving commercial construction and deciding I'm gonna, you know, getting into coaching and all that kind of stuff. And so how did you use like your spiritual know-how to like deepen the surrender piece, to like, because it's one thing to pragmatically understand, okay, I need to surrender, I need to not be tied to the outcome, I need to do something different, but then to actually feel that, how did you bridge that gap?
Yeah, because there's a big difference between surrendering and just like sitting on a yoga mat being like, what should I do? And just like completely just stopping, right? Like there has to be some work with the surrender piece, right? So it's finding that balance of like not forcing things that aren't meant to happen while also being open to all the opportunities. So, you know, it was a lot of meditation and journaling. I was like, I've been into journaling since it was like Dear Diary when I was 8 years old. Like I had to write those thoughts out, right? And so surrendering in terms of like giving up, trying to control the outcome of like those hard facts of like, I need to have a paycheck in 2 weeks, right? Like that, I can't necessarily make that happen, right? And finding those moments of like silence and knowing that, okay, if I have a thought and a vision and it easily opens that door, like I know I'm meant to explore this. If I have this thought or vision and that door slams in my face, I know that I'm not meant to force that door open. And so in this scenario specifically, it was a lot of through meditation and self-Reiki, as like cliche or woo-woo as that may sound to some people. My self-Reiki journey was giving me visions of a studio. Like it was like, you need to do this. And I literally went on to realtor.ca to like look at what spaces were even available in Port Perry. I hadn't told anybody, like I hadn't even spoke to my husband about this, right? And I was like, I wonder where this is. And then I remember driving and I was like, that's the space I saw. And it said for lease. And I was like, I'm just gonna call just to see when to go see it. And, you know, the landlord was like, oh, actually, I have like a bigger space available if you're interested. And so she had taken me upstairs and it was this huge loft space. And I just saw it and I was like, Lotus Loft. And it just like, it hit me so quickly. And so I didn't feel like I was necessarily surrendering to just like, you know, oh, I'm going to win the lottery, right? I was putting some work in to figure out, okay, like, is this feasible, right? So at that point, I went home to talk to my husband to say, like, I think we should do this. And he was like, pardon, what are we doing? You know, like, do you have a business plan? And I was like, no, but like, I just
open a studio. What else do you need to know?
Right? I was like, I just feel really strongly about this. Like, there's like this nudge, right? And I think a big part with the surrender piece or any of the work that we're doing ourselves is like listening to those nudges in our body, you know, so whether it's like a tingling sensation or goosebumps or like that like little in your tummy, like it kind of knows like, okay, this is like, listen to these physical cues your body's trying to tell you. Go for it.
That I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I was like, as you're talking, I was thinking about, yes, the surrender piece is so important, but also tuning into your body and like those little kind of impulses, which is hard for people to do, especially if they've been so like caught up in the rat race, like working full time, being a mom, being a wife, or like wearing all those hats that you mentioned earlier. It's really hard to listen to those impulses, those little tinglings. Especially because, as you and I know very well in our work with like somatics, we're disconnected from the mind and the body, and the body is like this most intuitive point. What would you say is like the easiest entry point? Because I think that, again, some of the people that are listening have lost their compass or their ability to tap into it. So how would you, like if somebody comes to you and says, I don't know what the hell to do, and I want to be able to start listening to myself.
Yeah.
What's like the number one thing that you would tell them to start with?
If they're looking to listen to themselves, I would say start with like 1 minute of silence every day. And then take a moment afterwards to write down about it. And then build on that. Build it up to maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. And it could be guided meditations. It could be just sitting in stillness. It could be breath work. I find, for my personal experience, when I first started yoga, that's what had helped me. Somebody had told me to go practice breath work, and I was like, what? Breath work? And I ended up in a yoga class, and it was like one of the most amazing classes I've still ever been to. And I found for me, it's like moving my body, doing some breath work, and then having that like 10-minute, what we call shavasana at the end, was like life-changing for me, because it forced me almost to sit in that stillness and silence that is hard to do from your home, because you have all these distractions and these thoughts of like, oh, I should be doing this or I should be doing that, whatever the case may be. So you've moved your body, you're moving the energy around, and then you're laying there and you're actually getting to feel these sensations in your body or throughout the mind.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
And again, like, even so sometimes like when clients come to me on like the intuition part and like how do I start listening, and Kevin, my partner, gives me a hard time about this if we're like picking apples or avocados out at the grocery store, because I'm like very like choosy. Like if it doesn't feel good, I'm not choosing that one.
Yes.
And that was one of the entry points that I had in kind of honing in my intuition, was like, okay, like, why am I picking this apple over that apple?
Yeah.
So like I started that practice at the grocery store.
Yeah.
And then of course, like further that within your classes, the piece of movement and yoga, especially as it relates to like how I started like getting really in tune with my practice and how I'm able to do yoga at home now, is moving through each pose and the intentional time that you encourage people to take in each pose, like holding it for a couple breaths and moving in sync with that. And I remember when I first started taking your classes, I would try and like, because I'm A-type go-getter, I'd like rush to the next pose thinking I knew what the next pose was going to be, and I didn't know. And you kept telling me like, slow down. You would shoot me a look, I remember, and like, slow down.
Yes.
Like how to like listen to your body, how to move slowly and find that stillness. I also love what you said about like the taking 1 minute. Start with 1 minute. That's it.
Yeah.
And if you can't find 1 minute in your day,
Look at your screen time on your phone.
100%. I call bullshit. I'm calling anybody out. I do it like the phones are designed to keep us sucked in there. But if you don't have time for a minute of silence, like you're probably avoiding it, because it can be a little deafening also to listen to your thoughts.
That is so hard. Like one of the biggest things people struggle with some of our meditations in the studio or anywhere is that sitting, like I have to sit with my thoughts.
Yeah.
If I can keep myself busy, and like not to give like stereotypes, but there's people that like want to go do like fast, hard things because it keeps them busy. It keeps their mind busy. They don't have to think about their emotions or the thoughts that are actually showing up in their head, right? Yeah. So finding that minute, there's other things that we can do to fill that space, right?
Absolutely. And what would be the best advice that you could give to somebody if they're like, okay, I'm finding a minute and all I can think about is all the shoulds, all the to-do lists, or like the kids are crying? Because like you balance being an entrepreneur, running a brick and mortar studio, having 2 kids, being a dance mom, being a wife, like being active in your parents' lives as well.
Yeah.
So how do you tell people, or what would you tell people to like quiet that?
So again, like the journaling thing for me is so big. Like when I have the busy mind and I can't sit in silence and I know it's time, I need to like just brain dump, write all the things that are occupying my mind that don't matter right now.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these shoulds, like, are you going to change them? Are you going to do them right now? No, right? I've had some clients that, you know, they're working on their meditation practice or just like their mindfulness. And I'm like, okay, so before you get out of your car to go into work, spend 1 minute there. Before you get into the house after work, find 1 minute there. Now you've just found 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. And just like, if you need to breathe, if you need to scream, whatever it is too, to like let go of any tension so that you do show up more present before going into the next whatever of should on your to-do list that you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. My mentor shared that, like, her mentor mentioned this before she goes to see somebody, or before she starts like the next thing, she breathes or she does some kind of meditation, and it's much like brushing her teeth before she goes to see somebody. She wants to show up in like the best kind of capacity, the best energy as she can, because that shifts how the other person reacts and interprets and receives information. I was just thinking about, because like, yes, like it's brain dumping and being into journaling, and some people aren't there yet. I know I was like super like, oh, I don't want to journal. Makes all the thoughts real.
Yeah.
And to find those quiet moments, I really found a lot of success and a lot of help with physical anchors. And when I do my rituals in the morning, or even like setting up this space, I was thinking about like just how much your influence is in so many bits of what I do every day. So you were the gateway into Palo Santo.
Sorry.
You know how much I love Palo Santo. So like I cleanse the space. I cleanse myself every morning. Like my oracle cards, my crystals. I often tell people, like, if they're having an anxious moment, and I do this myself, to have a crystal on hand. Essential oils. I, like, you introduced me to that wild world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like the ritual part is so important for people that are trying to create these like new habits or new routines, whatever you want to call them. And, you know, it's like, again, finding this balance of like, you don't need to go and like buy all of these things to create a space, right? Like start with like nature outside, right? Like grab a stick, grab a random rock that you find, create like a little altar so that you have a dedicated space where you can wake up in the morning and create this morning routine so that you can start your day off feeling the best, or whether it's in the evening, wherever you can find that little pocket of time, right? So then it's like that physical reminder of, okay, I'm now in this zone. It doesn't matter about all those distractions. Like I'm in my little space. It could be a little corner in your room where you have a couple of crystals and like your journal. Yeah. Right. And just that way you've got your space ready to go. So it's not a production of having to get that done.
Love that. That's like the habit cycle, like, or like Pavlov's dogs, right? Pavlov's dogs were trained that when the bell rings, like they'll start salivating because they knew dinner was going to be next. Bell equals dinner. And I'm the same way with like a certain song now. If I put that on, it instantly puts me into like, okay, we're going to find stillness now. Yes. And then I, of course, tell my clients like to try and do that with any kind of sound, smell, texture, like having that crystal on hand. On the subject of crystals, because like I think like when we first started dating, I was gonna say
when we kind of did date,
100%. When we first developed our friendship, like I would go to like, what is this crystal?
Right. Yeah.
What are these numbers? Because like you introduced me to the world of like universal numbers, like the 111, 222. Like, what does 111 mean again? And you're like, just Google it. Fine. Self-sufficient. Okay. But like if somebody was looking to kind of step into the spiritual world without buying all the things, what would be like the entry point?
I think that's going to be like very specific to each person, right? Some people are going to be drawn to crystals. Some people are going to be drawn to Palo Santo. Some people will be drawn to, you know, like an essential oil. Some people might be drawn to like nothing, right? I used to have a huge love for crystals, like especially when you and I had first started dating. But like on that note, completely off topic, I've definitely moved away from the crystals as much as I was, only because I've seen such this like mainstream shift of people purchasing crystals without even really knowing like why or where. And the way I look at it now too, is like there's only so much of these on our planet in Mother Earth.
Oh.
And there sometimes can be like a greed factor to the people supplying the crystals.
That's like the whole ethical sourcing is what you're talking about, right? Yeah.
And so I've just found like, how do I actually know that this is an ethically sourced crystal? You know, like not to get very specific about crystals because not everyone's going to resonate with this, but you know, I remember being at a market and this woman was talking to me about this crystal cola from Africa and that it was ethically sourced, and I was like, I have to be careful what I say here.
No.
I don't think there's much ethical
sourcing in Africa
happening.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I was like, that's
the crystal mine is right next to the lithium mine.
Right. And it's like the movie Blood Diamonds. It's like, it's similar with like the lithium. Like there's so many different resources that, you know, we get them here. We're like, oh, this is ethically sourced because someone sprinkled Reiki on it. But like, where did it actually come from?
Right.
What energy is actually being held in this crystal? So for me, like aromatherapy has been a big game changer. And I know that's something that I've introduced you to as well.
Gateway.
But you know, there are certain companies that can actually show you where these plants are being grown and how they're being grown without like the pesticides or whatever other crap they use on them. And it's a quick reminder, like when you're breathing, if you're doing some breath work, you stick some oil in your hand and that scent, similar to that song, there's certain scents that just go, okay. Like,
here we are.
I'm here now. Nothing else matters, right? And can just shift. Or there's certain scents that can like give you good reminders of like childhood. And then there's going to be scents that are maybe not
activating
good reminders, right? Could be a bit of a trigger. So I've been enjoying like that realm, and just like crystals have an energy component to it, so do all of the plants, right? Like fun fact, learning about like roses. Right? They are the highest frequency plant out there. So that's why they've always said to stop and smell the roses. Because they can shift your energy, right?
Beautiful.
So, yeah.
I love fun facts like that.
Don't know how we got into this topic. So.
Well, like it makes sense. Like I can kind of piece together. And it's funny because like I asked you for the advice on the crystals, and I'm so glad that you brought that up because like it is becoming more mainstream.
Yeah.
Right? Like I, of course, follow half a dozen accounts that like, oh, like I'm all about crystals and they have crystal shops and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember you talking to me briefly about like the ethically sourced crystals or ethically sourced Palo Santo or anything like that. Even the essential oils. I know that doTERRA has like, you know, strong principles and value systems in their particular company about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the better advice. Like I'm not telling people to go out and get crystals. I'm telling people the message is like to think about where shit's coming from.
Totally.
And I think that intersects really well with like the limbs of yoga for you, right? Like giving a shit about the environment and where things come from. You're also my go-to person for like, what's the best like tox-free makeup I can get?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's so important we talk about like these different things to change our mindset. And our energy, and we can like do all these things like physically or whatever. But like if we're doing breath work and we're breathing in shitty oils that are full of chemicals, I'm like, is that really good for us?
Right.
Probably not. Maybe. I don't know, right? Or like the crappy candles that exist out there. Yeah. Right? They just give
Bath and Body Works are like not like I'm calling them out.
Also, please don't ever give me a Bath and Body Works candle. I can't get over how many people give me this shit. I'm like,
oh really?
But anyways, or like whatever you're putting on your skin. Like I get that, you know, when we talk about like some of these tox-free or low tox products, they do tend to be more expensive, right? Because there's a better intention in the brand usually, and the sourcing of materials, and that's going to cost more money than buying like the $2.99 body wash at Shoppers. And I get that not everyone can buy the organic or whatever, right? But there's a lot of like cheap ways to create these products ourselves, right? There's a lot of apps out there as well. For me, I just like look at a product, look at the ingredients, and I will Google the actual ingredients. Like, what is actually this, right? Because it's usually some fancy scientific name that nobody knows what it is.
Right.
And then you Google and it's like, oh, it's this plus this equals
plastic.
this, right? Oh, cool. So it's like, do we really want this on our body? Do we want to be ingesting it, right? So I just try to look at all these ways of, if I'm so worried about my energy and making my body feel good, I don't want to fuel it with crap.
I love that. Well, and it's also like, it doesn't just stop with you. Like, it is like the environment and the world, and like, you know, you have to kind of think outside of yourself, which is a big part of like the surrender piece, the manifestation piece. Like, it's not just us.
No.
Like, there's something far greater
than
us. It's very egotistical to think that, like, you know, the trees grow because they just grow, not because they want to be the tallest. They want to be like the ones with the most needles or leaves.
Yeah.
They just fucking grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how does, not how does, but like when I think about you and I think about like the yoga studio, of course I think about the moon circles, and we haven't done as many moon circles because like life kind of sped back up again after the pandemic ended. But the moon cycles in particular, and I know that you're going to be creating like a platform for people to kind of learn more about this, but how do you leverage the moon cycles to tap into productivity, to intuition, and all those neat things?
So I'll keep it like entry level.
A gateway again.
Gateway. Because that's a whole podcast right there, right? But so you can kind of simplify into like two categories, right? So when we're having a new moon, so when you look up in the sky and you can't see it, that would be a new moon, or you see like that tiny, tiny little crescent piece. That is when the energy is most potent to be manifesting, right? So like as you're calling in, and I don't mean like manifesting like a new Mercedes and things like that, like manifesting like emotions, manifesting desires, whatever that case may be. That's the time where we want to leverage like growing with the moon is how I think of it, right? So as the moon is expanding, we're manifesting and talking to the universe, listening to the universe. When we have a full moon, that's when the moon starts to shrink in size. So that's when we want to let go. Okay. And it's similar to a female cycle. It is every 28 days. Yeah. And if you follow them closely enough, you'll eventually sync yourself. So when it's a full moon, we're letting go, like literally letting go of everything. Yeah.
Including our uterine lighting.
I was going to say that, but then I was like, there's probably male listeners.
And they should be educated as well.
100% should.
Guess what happens at the full moon, typically, unless you're a new moon bleeder.
Well, I mean, that does happen too, right? So, you know, you can use the full moon energy as a time to let go. And you hear people all the time saying like, oh, no wonder XYZ was so crazy. It's a full moon. Like there is some logic to this. It is actually moving the water around in our body, right?
And we're mostly water beings. Like we're 80% water.
100%, right? So, or it's like if you, anytime I've been to Costa Rica and there's a full moon, like the tides are way different than if you're there during a new moon, right? So it's moving the water in us as well. So things get a little bit, you know, a little more exciting, right? So from like a simplistic standpoint, you can think of full moon as a time to let go, like let go of any negative thoughts that aren't yours, you know, like things that have happened with your partners that like you don't want to like carry on, whatever it may be, emotions, right? And like really let it go. And it's not just going to happen like, oh, it's a full moon tonight and I've let go and I'm a changed person. It's all
you wake up
the time. Okay. It's constant. We don't just do this once and we're like, oh, I'm so amazing. And then the new moon, like calling in those new emotions that we want to have. So that's like, I would leave it at like there because those are like two fundamental like starting points. If anyone's like looking to get into following moon cycles, those for me, are what I use every month. So, you know, a lot of people, it's like New Year's Day, they wait all year to be like, okay, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And then another 364 days go by and I'm like, oh, I didn't do any of these things. Right. So it's kind of like a way, I don't like to think of them as goals. I usually call them intentions. So every month I'm kind of going, okay, what are my intentions for this next month, next season? And it kind of keeps them like bite-sized, small, right? Like I'm not going to, you know, have a thought today and then be able to manifest that like tomorrow.
Right.
Right? Because when we surrender, the universe has a different timeline for us. So again, sometimes we may like wish it, write it down, keep thinking about it, speak it into existence, but it's not going to happen tomorrow.
That's very true. That's very true. Even on like writing down the intentions and what you said about the New Year's, because of course everybody loves New Year's Eve and New Year's resolutions. Well, some people hate them, but there's a whole industry behind setting your intentions one time of year. And then of course you don't look at it for another 364 days and you lose the plot point. The check-ins, and similar to you and how I use them, is I sit down with the new moon, because like that's going to happen regardless. And I make the time. I don't like just, hope that I'm able to do it. I make the time to sit down and think about what I want. And similarly with the full moon, to look at like what I've been able to accomplish. And that keeps me recognizing the smaller wins, right? Like every couple of weeks, okay, like I am actually doing this, and I'm not, since I started following the moon cycles and doing these kinds of practices, I'm way less hard on myself, because I'm like, look what I'm actually doing.
It gives you like a check-in almost, right? You're like, you know what? A couple of weeks ago, I was wanting to feel this way, and now, like, you know what? Actually, I want to feel like better than that, actually. Or like I am feeling this way, right? Because I try not to get people so tied up in like the materialistic aspect of like these intentions, right? It's like, what
the
is
Mercedes.
Right? It's like, okay, well, if you get that new Mercedes, like what is the emotion that you're now feeling? Is it actually bringing you joy?
Yeah, and you're so good about that in the moon circles, and like even in the classes that you teach for yoga, it's like it's so much more than just the paycheck, the car. Of course, we all want those like things, but it's about how you feel inside. And like if you're feeling shit about things or your life, and then you get the Mercedes,
you're still gonna feel like shit. You're just gonna have a nice car.
Right? You can drive around in your fancy car feeling like shit, which is you've missed the plot
buying more
point.
expensive gas.
Right, only premium. And not to mention like the repair bills and maintenance bills are that much higher.
Right, so it's like what are we actually working on, right? And it takes a while to get there, right? Like I'm sure when most people start this practice, and like Gabby Bernstein was like a big part of my manifesting journey with a couple of her books and oracle cards, right? And she talks about that a lot too, right? And it's okay, like yes, at the beginning we're like, oh, I want like a nice new car, and I want like a bigger house, and I want but like what are the actual things that we're cultivating with that, right? It's because you want like a safer space for your kids to grow up in.
Right.
Cool. We want like, do you want a safer car for you to drive your kids around in, or for yourself? Okay, that makes sense, right? Like dig deeper.
Yeah, I love that, digging deeper. So what would be the best, or what has been rather, like the best advice that you've maybe received from like the Gabby Bernstein or like other like spiritual mentors that sticks with you to this day?
That's hard.
I know.
I've had a lot of mentors. For a spiritual journey aspect and manifesting, definitely like the surrender piece, right? Is like, okay, so I'm trying to bring it down into like a smaller example, but we could have a vision, a desire, like a heartfelt desire of something happening. And we're so hard pressed on like that thing that we lose sight of all these other opportunities, right? So it's like you can have those heartfelt desires, but like still be open to all of the other amazing possibilities that are always going to be around us, because then as we can get to tunnel like focused on one outcome, that all these other things are available, and we lose out on that, right? So I think that's one piece. I did have one mentor talking about like business. I did have one mentor that said, if you really want to be successful with your business, you need to close all the back doors.
Oh.
Right?
What does she mean by like?
Close all, like it, so it's kind of contradictory to what I just said, right? But she had said to me, if you're wanting to leave the corporate world and like do this, like you can't just do that part-time, right? And it was like, if you want to be successful at opening the studio, let's say, you're always going to have that back door to like sneak out to. But like, oh, this wasn't successful, so I'm just going to go back here.
Like it's like a fail safe, or like a safety net or whatever. Like, you can go back, and so like you're not maybe putting all of the effort into.
So like don't half-ass it. Like if you're going to do it, full ass
go
it.
all in.
Right?
Go all in.
So I did have a mentor that was completely like more business side of things.
That's perfect, because I was going to ask that about like the business thing. So like you segued perfectly into it.
right? Because it's like, again, finding that balance of like surrendering, but you got to do some work, right? We can't just be like, oh, I wish upon a star on a new moon. This is all going to fall into my lap.
Right.
Right? You got to put you have to put work into it. Right?
Yeah, that's so true. Like every day, and like when I think about where I started to where I am now, it's because I take the time for stillness and silence and asking myself questions and yes, like bringing in all these like fun elements like the moon and crystals and essential oils. But I also do the deep work.
Yeah.
And the sooner I think people recognize that like there is deep work to be done, there's like the shadow parts of ourselves that we need to confront, the more opportunity that you're going to have to really bring the manifestations into like actual fruition.
100%. And like, you know, I know you have a background in Reiki and as do I. And when I do Reiki or any type of training, really, like anytime we're sharing information with others, a big thing I want to always like portray to people is that like, just because we offer these modalities, whatever, doesn't mean that like we're healed. Like we're always doing the work on ourselves.
Right.
Like it never ends, right? Just because someone promotes themselves as like a Reiki healer, breathwork healer, yogi, whatever. It's like all we've done is just we now know what modalities work for us so that when life throws us shit, we know how to deal with it,
Very
right?
good point.
So it's like we're constantly doing work on ourselves. It's not like it just stops and we've manifested a bunch of stuff and life's perfect. I'm just going to sit here and drink my tea.
It's not that simple.
There's always shadow work to be done because we're constantly triggered by somebody else for something that may have happened like 10 years ago, right?
Well, yeah, and like because so much of what we like the programs that we have running in our heads and in our bodies is subconsciously driven. Like 95% of what we do, we're not even aware of. Like we're running on autopilot. Like we'll drive to work and like how do we get here? Like how do you know how to drive a car because you learned X many years ago, right? And so you need to be very aware of those subconscious patterns and habits and behaviors that are running the show, and just start with awareness is what I tell my clients. Like you need to be aware that you're doing the thing that you might not like, and then start to shift it. And it isn't as simple as saying like, okay, it's the new moon, and so I intend to not do this behavior like that I don't like, and then on the full moon I let it go. Like
Especially like that kind of example, right? It's like you need a daily check-in, be like, am I showing up like the person I said I was going to show up as, right?
That's a great checkpoint,
right?
Actually, every single day, like, or every decision that you come across, how would the person that I want to become respond to the situation?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You're so wise.
Sometimes.
But we also have a lot of fun. Like there's so many giggles in the yoga classes and the yoga retreats that I've gone on with you. Like you just bring a really nice levity. Like yes, you say, you know, like there's work involved, but you bring such a lightness and such a levity to it that keeps me coming back. Like obviously, like, and you've been such an instrumental part to my journey, and I'm so grateful for you.
I'm so grateful for you.
Aw.
I'm so glad you asked me out for coffee
All
those moons ago.
On our first date, where did we go? We went to that place on Queen,
We went to
right?
that place on Queen, and even a year later, we celebrated, and we were both like, do we acknowledge that this is like our date-iversary? That's how corny we are.
I think that you should date your friends.
100%.
Like my best friend Elaine in Fenland Falls, like we say the same thing. Like, remember our first date?
Yeah.
And like we said, like, are we going to be like best friends now?
Right? Yeah.
So I'm really grateful that you've been like such a big part. And again, like when I was thinking and setting up for this conversation that we're going to have today, like how many parts like you've introduced me to. You're really like this gateway.
Kind of. I'm like a gateway drug.
I feel like I just like I had like a little kind of intuitive ping while we were talking. Like your new platform that you're going to be creating for like all the moon circles. Not that I'm being pushy, but
no pressure.
The gateway or something like that. It's just yeah.
Okay, we'll have to chat about that.
Yeah, we'll have to definitely. So I think that's a really good point to leave it.
Yeah.
For today's conversation. I feel like, as you said earlier, there might be an opportunity for us to like dive into the moon circles or manifestation or any of that kind of stuff and riff on that. But thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I hope that everybody enjoyed this. And so we'll call it a day. My producer is, yes, I have a producer, but my producer is pointing to which camera of the 4 I'm supposed to look at. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that this episode has resonated. Thank you to Kristina for joining me today. I'm going to link a lot of where you can find her on social media and in studio here in Port Perry if you want to do yoga, breath work, Reiki. Definitely go check her out. If this, I'm getting pointed at again to another camera. This is wild. If this episode resonated, please give it a like, share, subscribe, share it with your friends, reach out with any questions. And in the meantime, breathe it in, be deliberate, and please be good to yourself.